Stadlen as well. Bless you both for coming on a bank holiday Monday. Happy Easter. Happy Easter. Chocolate filled?
Oh, huge amounts, yeah. Not as much as my 2-year-old, though.
OK, what's the chocolate of choice?
Well, I like those chocolate eggs with a sort of slightly gooey chocolate inside. I'm not for the dark chocolate and not really for the white chocolate.
Right, OK.
I'm a mini egg person
Mini egg.
through and through, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a supermarket, little mini supermarket downstairs. Does 1 kilogram bags.
That's what I need. I'll be there afterwards.
Aforementioned eggs. Yeah. It's fun for all the family and the entire workforce as well, and it's kept me going through many a broadcast. There's lots in the papers actually for a bank holiday Monday. Quite a lot of kind of defence stuff, which we're going to get through as well.
And resilience, isn't it?
And resilience. Nuclear plants and security fears. And this is touted to be the way kind of we bring ourselves energy security is to have lots of little Hinkley points around the country. But then if you've got lots of little Hinkley points, you've got lots of little points you can go and attack as the fears that are being raised.
Yeah, this is right. And obviously this is all part of the government's push to make us more self-sufficient when it comes to our energy infrastructure as well. Part of the problem with our nuclear plan is that it has been tossed back and forth between governments, ministers over the last couple of decades, and there has been a real failure to innovate when it comes to nuclear. And now the government is basically trying to pick up the pieces, trying to get this overall plan of energy efficiency and less reliance on places like Russia and the international energy market, because we've seen how expensive oil and gas has been for us. But we are behind now. And as much as there is a push for these fast-track, small modular reactors, as you say, to make our kind of energy supply more diverse across the country, again, a lot of this is dependence on other countries to provide us with the infrastructure and the equipment, and therefore there's just more concerns about as we try and get more self-sufficient, are we actually getting more reliant on other countries as well, and are we making ourselves more vulnerable to potential terror attacks, security incidents, etc.
I think this is a really interesting story because we've heard quite a bit, haven't we, about how successful the French have been with their nuclear power. And a lot of commentators or a lot of people have been suggesting that we should have followed suit and that would have somehow solved all our problems at once. Of course, with nuclear energy, as you say, comes risk, and this is what this front page is all about. You don't want those mini nuclear plants, if they are erected, to be the subject of terror attack. And nuclear energy can, of course, create nuclear disasters. My worry about the government's understandable push for growth, for resilience, for self-sufficiency, is that if you rush decisions, I'm not saying they necessarily have, but there is a risk that if you rush decisions, you can make bad decisions or that things slip through the net.
The other thing that just strikes me is obviously there is the civil nuclear constabulary that protects the current sites already. Technically, you can give them more money and create more resources there, for example. The thing you can't do is control the weather and natural disasters, and that's why Germany's pulled back from nuclear facilities off the back of what happened in Japan. Japan obviously coming back there as well. So there's that other element, the kind of the security fear as a result of the things you can't control.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of risks attached to nuclear, and I think most people agree if they're going to do it, it needs to be part of a broader package which has other kind of sustainable energy sources as well, and probably a bit more oil and gas going forward for the next decade.
And, of course, you need to fund the police forces to actually be able to defend it. More money.
And I'm sure the developers will tell us they're incredibly secure, incredibly safe, and have very detailed plans to make sure that none of this comes to fruition. Front page of The Times, UK boosts munitions to end dependence on US. And the figures here are remarkable.
What's, I think, remarkable about this story is that if it is, as it says it is, the UK is moving away from dependence on the United States for ammunition, at least in part because we no longer trust America as a stable ally since Trump became president for the second time. It's not just that by the way, that we're moving away from America, according to this article, also moving away, I think, from some reliance on the French. And BAE Systems, which is the biggest defence manufacturer in Europe, is now determined, I think, to make sure that we have not just infrastructure, not just the weapons, but also the ammunition.
Yeah, it feels also like potentially the Labour government have found part of what this kind of this vision is, which they've been struggling to put into words, and that commentators like us have been struggling to put into words as well, which is what does the UK look like and what is the Labour government going to do with the UK? And I think because of the global challenges and the shifting alliances around the world, there is a focus now on being much more self-reliant, but also having to be much more militarily focused. And I think this boosting of munitions and boosting of our own warfare capacities, they are hoping could also be that engine for growth and restoration of individual communities across the UK. So things like BAE Systems, which we know are quite concentrated in the north of England, for example, I think they're hoping that could do some of that levelling up that we've heard a little bit less of, but it's definitely part of Labour's vision too.
What seems to me, as a non-defence expert, to be critical is that in trying to play catch-up, and it seems that we do need to catch up when it comes to our defence, we don't just create the weapons, build the infrastructure that would have been relevant 5 years ago, after the horse has bolted, but that we are absolutely sure we are up to date with the latest technologies in the way that battles are being fought, because we know that the pace of change is quick.
And the cynic in me would say that the 155mm round that's used in artillery is perhaps the most simple thing that we could be producing ourselves. The F-45 fighter jets, still an American design at its heart. Nuclear warheads that we use in the weaponry and the systems designed to support those. The warheads are our own, but the missiles based on American designs. The really technical stuff, we're still in partnership with many countries, and particularly the US.
And this is so much, as you were saying, about interdependence, inter-reliance. And it is shocking, and I think this should be punched out. It is shocking that we are now, in the space of 3 or 4 months since President Trump became president again, in a position where we are really not quite trusting traditionally our number one ally.
Yeah.
And an ally that is still utterly critical, as you say, with the nuclear deterrent, to our own self-defence.
That state visit in September has got some heavy lifting to do. Let's move on to the front page of The Guardian, shall we? Due to Brexit, in inverted commas, UK cancer patients losing out on life-saving drugs.
Yeah, so this is says it's one of the most comprehensive analysis is done of this of the cost of the UK's exit from the EU 5 years ago. But this is particularly frightening, especially for a country like ours, which is having a real health crisis. We have an ageing population, we have much more complex health needs, and we have, a lot of people who can't work. We have sluggish growth, which is something the Labour government is very keen on addressing, yet we are committing this act of self-harm by being outside of the EU, which means we are denying British cancer patients and other sufferers of various illnesses these life-saving drugs and trials of revolutionary treatments because they're being derailed by the extra costs brought on by Brexit red tape. And not being a part of that kind of trading partnership. In some cases, the cost of importing new cancer drugs for Britain has nearly quadrupled as a result of post-Brexit red tape. So you can see how, 5 years on, all these promises that were made by people on the right about what Brexit would achieve, we're actually putting our population at harm at a time where our health needs are already incredibly complex.
And it says here that across Europe there is a golden age from which patients are benefiting, and we are not getting the boon from that. We're not taking advantage of that because we've lost out, thanks to rising prices and red tape.
And also you think visa restrictions as well on researchers bringing families across. There may be some that don't want to come now or can't come.
And when we hear about whether we should be closer to the US or closer to the EU, these are the sorts of questions that need to be asked. And ideally, of course, we'd be close to both. But with so much uncertainty in our relationship with America and stories like this, you wonder whether we should be getting closer again to the European Union. And Starmer is relatively well placed to do that, you would have thought, if he's brave enough.
Do you think he's brave enough?
No, and I also don't think that is at the core of the ideology of the people surrounding Starmer. I think that sort of protection, seeing how that kind of protectionism worked out for Trump's vision in the US, that appeal to voters about being more isolationist, I worry that the Labour government is going to go in a different direction, which is, back with that resilience and self-sufficiency stuff, but pushing that even further, actually being quite, not hostile to the EU, but not wanting to go there, even though you can see all the benefits.
It's still politically so toxic, isn't it? And he, as a man who wanted a second referendum, I think first term, we don't know whether he'll get a second term, will be loath to rock that boat.
Plenty more in the papers, plenty more hours to do so. You're both going to be back later in the programme. We'll get through these in due course. We're also going to get through the day's weather.